That's a great question. What is so scary about a centralized government offering the bare necessities to every single person as a guarantee, not something that you have to pay for, that you have to struggle and potentially die for? Why are we so focused on maintaining our a robust stock market and high GDP at the expense of our most vulnerable people? Why is everyone so afraid of communism?
The tankies.
Yeah.
No, I'm totally joking. Oh my gosh. I don't know why, Amy. I'm just a little nervous. I got nervous.
Why?
I don't know. I can't explain
I'm wearing like a nightgown and everything. Like, this is casual.
Okay.
We're good.
So we're cash. Okay.
We're cash. The lighting's cash. Everything's cash today.
Before we begin, do you have like any questions? I think I gave you a little heads up. What's been going on here? We've been talking about housing crises for the past week. It's literally like every time I spend any amount of time looking into it, it's like it seems to like sprawl out even more. It's even bigger than I imagined, and that's terrible. And I can't.
It's way worse than I think people do realize.
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
So folks, here's a shout out for AmyeC3. There's the link in the chat. Make sure you're following this wonderful, terribly wonderful human being, AmyeC3. Terribly wonderful.
Stop it.
We had a wonderful chat. And last time that we had you on, I want to thank you again for being with me and telling us all about what you do. And again, I've been spending the past week and a half talking about the housing crises. At the top of my notes, I put housing crisis, and that eventually got crossed out, and it says crises now.
Right.
And
because it's not just a rental crisis. It's not just an eviction crisis.
Right.
We could be seeing another foreclosure crisis. So it's not just affecting renters, it's also affecting vulnerable homeowners.
I just, oh my God, there's like another thing. I didn't even like write down foreclosure. Earlier today, I wrote down utilities on this list. I'm like, how did I leave out utilities? Amy, I'm really happy to have you here. One of the things that I want to do, and I hope this is cool with you, is just take a look at my notes. You know, I want to like compare notes and perhaps have you show me where there are some gaps that need to be filled. For instance, the foreclosure crisis. And I somehow am like bonking my head thinking, how did I not list this? All right. So
no worries.
Yeah.
The foreclosure crisis.
Okay.
Has right now there's around 2 million people who are in delinquency status, meaning they haven't paid. And this is a little older news, but it was released in March of this year. Roughly 2.1 million homeowners have not paid their mortgage for 90 days or more. Some of these loans are FHA loans, meaning that they were federally backed by a government-sponsored enterprise or entity that offers a little bit more financial assurance and opportunities for financing assistance that might keep the lower income homeowners safely sheltered in place. But for the individuals who have traditional home loans, who lost their jobs because of COVID-19, they could be on the brink of foreclosure. And the reason why this is so incredibly important to talk about now is because of the activities that occurred after the 2008 subprime mortgage collapse, where a ton of homeowners lost their homes to foreclosure. And what ended up happening was a pool of private equity firms ended up acquiring those single-family homes in the suburbs and converted them into rental units. That started this new market where private equity firms were investing in the acquisition of existing homes in the suburbs and also helping to finance additional projects specifically for rental units. That has made it even more difficult now to enter the buyer's market because there hasn't been as much supply added to the owner side of the market, and has literally forced people into long-term rentership because the barrier of entry is so high. The cost of a mortgage is so high. The necessity of a down payment, a good credit score, and employment history is absolutely keeping people from feeling comfortable to begin that process to fulfill a 30-year mortgage. And it's a lot less risky for them, especially if they've incurred other forms of debt, whether it be student loan debt or other debt that could be too much to bear if they added albeit even if they had a fixed interest rate and a pretty good deal, a long time to be paying off a loan, not knowing what our economy is going to look like in the next 10 to 15 years. Are we going to experience more recessions that are the worst since the Great Depression? Are we finally going to see ourselves in an economic recession that is worse than the Great Depression? I think a lot of those financial insecurities lead to those precarities in our decisions to stay renting, as opposed to take on that huge risk of owning a home and paying off that 30-year loan. So, sorry for the data dump.
No, that's good. I think I missed some of that, but that's fine because we're making video. I'll be able to go back and catch anything that I missed. Really good stuff, and because I am very much in sort of like a note taking, period. Definitely trying to learn about this, trying to put myself in a position where I can try to wrap my head around this. And at first, it was just going to be a week, Amy. We were just going to spend a week talking about it, and I sort of quickly realized, wow, this is how you can turn. Not your entire channel, because obviously you talk about a lot of things, but this is how you can, turn this into a specialty. And you were the first person I thought of when I was looking into this and trying to think, like where are the holes in my notes? What am I missing here? So actually, yeah, why don't we get right back into that? Actually, hold on. Before we do this, Amy, do you want to give yourself the big shout out? Like, what do you do? Where can people find you? We sort of like launched right into it. Yeah, introduce yourself.
Yeah, no, getting so excited talking about it.
I'm so excited.
All of the things that we need to talk about. It's not exciting in the fact that I love talking about it. It's that I take every opportunity possible to raise the red flag because people do not understand how serious this issue is, especially if they don't have to worry about the brink of foreclosure or eviction. They might experience cost burden rents, but a lot of people who are not in a position where they understand the plight of potential homelessness can't necessarily wrap their head around how serious of an issue it is and how many people are really struggling. So that is my introduction. Hi, hello, my name is AmyeC3. I talk about housing here on Twitch. I also am working on delving into the world of data journalism. So a lot of my pieces that I am working on or I plan to work on have absolutely all the things to do with housing, but I'm trying to incorporate my writing with data that help tell the story. So storytelling through data visualization is really what I'm trying to lean into right now. I'm also working on putting together a structured, formatted housing show where I'll be covering the news. And that will be, something that I want to do on a recurring basis. Haven't got to it yet, but that's going to be on YouTube. Recorded on Twitch live and then added to YouTube. And just trying to get people interested and understand what is going on right now in our housing market, using data to really tell the story as a way to visually stimulate the mind and help to really get the point across by putting together fun, pretty, aesthetically pleasing looking data visualizations or graphs. That's what I do.
Yeah, this is truly wonderful, Amy, and this is why I wanted you here today. You mentioned data, and one piece of data, and I want you to feel free to correct me if this is not accurate, but we were looking into this homeless to available dwellings. There are, for every one homeless person, there are 32 available dwellings in the United States. This is based on the data that there were 567,000 individuals experiencing homelessness on a single night in January. I think that was a point in time count, which we just learned about yesterday.
Point in time count. It's conducted on what is in January or February, which would be the most I guess I don't know if it's if it has to do with the fact that it's the coldest night. It's supposed to be like during one of the colder nights in the winter where more people would be seeking shelter.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be the most accurate counts of individuals who are experiencing homelessness, and the definition of homelessness varies.
Okay.
So
that's good to know.
You can be couch surfing, and that is considered homeless. But people who are living on the street, living outside, experiencing chronic homelessness, who have been homeless for more than 30 days.
Okay.
Those are the tabulations that they're looking to really put together.
Is that the McKinney-Vento homelessness definition, or is that something else? I was just learning about this last night.
HUD has their definitions of homelessness.
McKinney-Vento homelessness specifically is involving children and youth. Okay, excuse me. Pardon I'm like just trying to wrap my head around this.
No worries.
Okay.
No worries.
Yeah. So we're comparing notes here. Yeah.
Yeah. HUD actually also, their definitions of homeless youth span way above the age range of adulthood. So you can be 20 years old and you're still very young, right?
Yeah.
And they treat homeless youth, even if you are of age, if you're 18 or older, with a little bit more of care, and they necessitate the need to offer as much service as possible to those who might be experiencing homelessness at a very young age. Unfortunately, there's also a correlation between LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness because their parents kick them out of their homes. And so, and that's another reason why the cutoff date isn't at 18, especially if a child who was forced out of their home during their developmental years, they could need additional services because of the psychological trauma that they experienced during their formative years, during the time where their brain is developing, and they need to be in the safest environment possible. That can cause developmental issues and psychological and cognitive issues down the road.
So just going back to my notes here, the homelessness crisis is just but one of I think what's fair to call the housing crises that we're currently looking at. We have the problem of landlords, just literally just the existence of it, and the fact that is just the whole center of the problem, right? We've talked
in many respects, yes, the commodification that leads the commodification of housing. So the fact that we have to literally find our own homes as consumers in the same way that we have to buy our other necessities. We have to purchase our own food for the most part. We don't have a lot of government assistance. There are food stamps, there's SNAP programs, but these are not fully funded. They're not offered to everyone. By and large, most people are forced to enter the private market, pay whatever they have to out of pocket to keep a roof over their head. And they are subjected to whatever charges they incur by their landlords, who have the power to set the price of rents however high they do so choose. Now, they say that they set it relative to the fair market price of the greater market in their area. But again, this is up to the discretion of the landlord to set the cost of rents. And so, as we are at the mercy of landlords, we're also kind of obligated to fulfill whatever duty that is applied to our lease if there is a huge surcharge in rent, and there oftentimes is after a great economic recession, right? Because landlords have, in this case, absolutely missed out on now over a year's worth of rent that is outstanding, and how they will try to make up for these losses is to set the new cost of rent, once this moratorium on evictions is lifted, even higher. And we've already seen that. Right now, we have seen a 10% climb in average rents. Right now, with leases renewing, that is higher than pre-pandemic rates. So this is absolutely only going to get worse. the cost burden that will be applied to renters as landlords try to make up for these losses will be incredibly detrimental to our own financial security and could lead to even more evictions down the road if existing tenants are not able to keep up with these additional charges. They could be priced out of their own homes as well in a year's time, maybe longer, especially because we know that wages have been stagnant for quite some time, and the cost of rent has outpaced the cost of our wages, or the amount of our wages, and it's looking to be an upward trajectory in how much rent we will eventually pay in order to keep a roof over our head. So yeah, that is the unfortunate downside of relying on the private sector and individual landlords. We are at their mercy. There is not a lot of regulatory oversight. We don't have rent control across the board. We don't have stabilization. We don't have public housing.
Mm-hmm.
We just have whatever in the market and whatever we can bear in terms of rental costs.
Getting harder to bear and increasingly impossible. Maybe we can touch on the low income housing crises as well. Amy, as I understand, in the United States, for every 100 low income households looking for housing, there are 32 available kinds of those housing, and it goes as low as 20 in some places in the United States. And as I understand it, there's sort of a squeeze in this these kinds of housing. There's not a lot of them, and sort of some people are sort of saving a buck by staying in places that's a little cheaper than maybe they could afford another place. So there's just not a lot of them. There's a lot of people trying to live. What else is going on there? Can you hold our hand through the low income housing crises here?
So we have two different variations of what is considered low-income housing, apart from public housing, which absolutely falls into that category of low-income housing. But if we're talking about affordable housing in the private market, and your statistics might be looking at public housing stock that's provided by HUD.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and cover that first.
Yeah.
Our public housing stock in the United States is dilapidated. It is of poor quality. The substandard conditions that these residents are subjected to is criminal. It is because of a law that was passed during the Clinton administration. It's called the Faircloth Amendments. The Faircloth Amendments eliminated the need for the federal government to provide any more housing stock beyond the total number of units as of a certain day in 1999. That total number of housing units that is considered a public housing stock is the only number of public housing units that the government has to provide. So if the existing housing stock finally fails to pass public or safety code, if it's in violation of any ordinance and has to be demolished, then the federal government, or HUD, through HUD, they have to provide new housing stock to make up for that lost housing stock. So by having a number or a ceiling on the total number of housing units that the government has to provide, that forces the rest of the housing stock to be provided in the private market, which leads to the other variations of affordable housing in the private market. You have what is called naturally occurring affordable housing, which is housing owned by private landlords where the rent is considered well below fair market value, the average cost of rents. I've seen some definitions set the cost of $600 a month or less in affordable costs. You also have the completely underfunded Section 8 housing voucher program. Okay. These are subsidies that are offered to landlords, also in the private market, who can also deny applicants if they do so choose. So there's a lot of discrimination on that end as well. A lot of landlords don't want to accept housing voucher recipients. They don't have to. that is the other mechanism from which we have affordable housing. Some municipalities offer additional affordable housing programs. It just depends. Also, some also provide public housing stock at the local level. But our federal affordable housing program, by and large, is the Section 8 housing voucher program, alongside a tax credit program that offer private landlords or private developers low-income housing tax credits to build new affordable housing. And even then, affordable housing in one area is not necessarily going to meet the standards of the most vulnerable low-income residents who make well below the area's median income, that might not be able to even afford to pay whatever affordable rate is applied. Seeing as though this is very formulaic, and an affordable housing recipient can technically be making 80% of the area median income. I always use the example of Manhattan in Chelsea neighborhood, where the average or median income is around 100 grand. So if developers if developers receive low-income housing tax credits to build new housing stock in one of the most expensive areas in Manhattan, then they can accept housing vouchers from a recipient who makes 80 grand, and they are meeting their obligation of providing affordable housing to somebody who meets those standards. In the case of New York, they might have, because they are a little bit more progressive in their tenant rights, they might have standards as they do here in Los Angeles, where you only apply or you only receive applicants who are making 50% area median income or below. Only they are eligible for Section 8 vouchers or affordable housing through the LIHTC program, because there is such a large wealth inequality issue in Los Angeles, in New York, that if you are between that threshold of making above 50% area's median income, but you're still technically qualified and eligible for low-income housing, you're not suffering enough for the government to provide you with some subsidy. You just kind of have to find a way to make your own sacrifices and take on that cost burden, because there's plenty of people who are making way less than you who need that voucher way more than you. And that's kind of the burden that's placed on, those who fall in between. Also,
please.
Fun facts.
Yeah.
Talking about Section 8 housing vouchers.
Yeah.
1/4 of applicants who do qualify for Section 8 vouchers receive them, because it's so grossly underfunded. This program is so grossly underfunded that HUD can only provide 1/4 of these applicants with the vouchers, and the other 3/4, somebody who falls into that threshold that we just talked about, they go without. So again, that burden is placed back on them to find whatever units that are available in the private market based on their own purchasing power, meaning what rents they can shoulder based on whatever income they are making.
So Section 8 housing is, excuse me, I was literally at the HUD.gov website. That's what, I'm sorry, I got a siren, of course, very excited. I live in between two different fire stations, and they just seem to go opposite directions. It doesn't make sense. Okay. So is Section 8 housing what you would get if you were to go through HUD and find your local public housing people, and you'd call them and you'd get Section 8 housing? Is that the idea? You would apply for that, except 3/4 don't get accepted? Is that the idea? Are those the things?
So
okay.
HUD distributes Section 8 vouchers to local housing authorities. At the local level, you would go to your local authority, go through that process. They facilitate the process of giving you the voucher. With the application process of these housing vouchers, you are put on a waiting list for the most part, because incredibly underfunded, it is a lottery.
Mm-hmm.
So once you receive the voucher, if you are so lucky to receive one at all, you have only a few months to find a landlord who will accept the voucher. And if you cannot find a landlord that will accept the voucher,
because they discriminate, it's hard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So then you lose it. And so you only have a certain amount of time where you can find a landlord to accept your voucher anyway.
I'm so fucking mad, dude. These are not fun facts. Although I'm not mad at you.
sorry.
I didn't expect them to be fun.
They're not fun. I was being a little facetious.
I figured.
Yeah, so incredibly strict standards when it comes to the time period that you have to even utilize your voucher.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to find a landlord who even accepts your voucher, then you lose it altogether and you have to reapply.
Oh my gosh, dude. We have Ali Osher in chat right now. Ali Osher mentioned earlier that his application, their application process took over 6 years.
Yep.
And it's just like, I hear facts like that, and sometimes I get like really fucking angry, and then other times I have no feelings anymore. Do you ever get to that point where you don't have any more feelings? Just like tapped out sometimes.
Unfortunately, I feel once you reach a point where you're so enraged, I think you start to callous over because you think one more thing and I'm just going to implode. Like I think about that. I'm like, I have to find a way to turn this off because otherwise I think I might spontaneously combust.
Yeah. Let me turn, if you don't mind, to some questions that we had came up with from chat before we went live. Just because I think maybe some of these will tie in nicely to what we've just been talking about. Alan, who's an Illinois activist, a housing activist, amongst others, asked earlier, what about different kinds of rent control that you're aware of? We learned about Prop 21 on rent control, which didn't pass. It lost 60-40, is that right?
Yes.
In California. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So what happens is you have the realtors lobby with an immense amount of power. On a national level, the National Realtors Association, they pay so much money to maintain their current, to maintain municipalities' current tenant and landholders or property owners' rights that disproportionately grant more power to landlords. And that is what you saw with this latest iteration of rent control standards that were put on the ballot as a referendum here in California. Lobbyists and corporations who pay for misinformation campaigns typically do very well. We have seen that not only with rent control. We have seen that with Uber and Proposition 20, was it 19 or I can't keep these propositions all together, but Prop 22. Also, there's an issue with corporations not only paying for legislation, but also controlling for the outcome of the election because of the result of, in this case, not the election, but the results of the ballot initiative, because they have such a large reach. They can afford to propagandize their message in the most effective way. And going against those big moneyed interests is incredibly difficult. So when we're talking about something like a rent control standard in California that has been going through its own housing crisis for a very long time. That is, by and large, the single most important issue to focus on. The money that's in politics that allows these huge lobbies to maintain these positions of power that already benefit them and already put them in a better position. I just wanted to put that kind of out there on the table that
Right. And
we can't really talk about rent control initiatives whenever, even if they were passed, they're not going to go far enough. And whenever you have these lobbies putting enough money into halting any legislative changes that we could see, we're not going to win through electoralism. Even though direct action in this instance, did put up a good fight. Even through this process, of what is seemingly a democratic, where you have the opportunity to make a decision based on your own informed opinion. When you have a real estate lobby informing those opinions, and you vote against your own interests because they have lied to you and they have blatantly misinformed you. This is incredibly difficult, and no organizing effort so far can go up against the big moneyed interest of the real estate lobby. So going to rent control standards that are here in California with plenty of loopholes. Rent control standards only apply to housing stock that was built after or before, rather, before a certain year, 1990. Anything after does not have a rent control standard. That's what this newest iteration of rent control was trying to establish. And that even if you were living in a newer unit, there was still a possibility that you were experiencing incredibly high rents, and a rent control standard should also apply. Landlords have been working around rent control standards for a long time. The biggest loophole they use here in California is the Ellis Act, where landlords have the power to kick out their tenants in the event that they have a family member that they want to occupy that wants to occupy the unit. That is a just cause eviction. That is also used to remove lower income tenants from their rent control building. But with the Ellis Act, if landlords want to find that workaround, they can say that conversions to their rental unit will be made, and this housing stock, this rental stock will now be converted into, let's say, a bed and breakfast. I don't know if they have bed and breakfast here in California, but something like a bed and breakfast that'll just go onto Airbnb or condos, or something that would lead to long-term ownership of the units. That would be the workaround to no longer be beholden to those rent control standards. That happens a lot. And it's also one of the reasons why a research paper in San Francisco found that rent control standards could be bad because of how many naturally occurring affordable housing units were lost after a rent control ordinance was implemented in San Francisco that also has its own affordable housing crisis that's very unique to the economic growth due to Silicon Valley, among other things. And so it wasn't necessarily that all of a sudden rent control standards led to less housing built. That is absolutely true, because if landlords cannot extract as much wealth from their tenants as they do so choose, they might not see the profit motive, or they might not have that incentive to build more rental units. They find a way to convert their existing rental units into long-term units or short-term stays like Airbnbs. And that's how rental units are lost in the aftermath of a rent control standard that's newly implemented.
Well, right. So let me try to summarize and just make sure I'm understanding here. Talking about rent control, it's sort of not a great strategy for us because it's stymied by the problems of electoralism, the real estate lobby. There's big real estate, right? There's no big homeless. There's no homeless lobby, you know. Clearly, there's people lobbying on behalf of homeless people, but the money's nowhere near comparable. So that's what I'm saying.
Exactly. And another thing is rent control is a neoliberal half measure that ultimately will not go far enough. It would most likely be best utilized as a supplemental or ancillary ordinance or regulation that would be applied to individuals who wouldn't fit the criteria of a low income renter or a cost burden renter, and would not be subjected to high costs of rents based on landlords' propensity to raise rents on other properties that have newly imposed rent control standards. So if we think about how to get more people on board with the notion of a rent control standard, that would have to be working in tandem with additional public housing stock and additional affordable housing options. We would have to control for the landlord's change in behavior, where they would most likely target those buildings. If we're using the existing rent control standard that's applied here in California, and in our hypothetical, we are using an example of a landlord who has housing stock in both older units with rent control standards and newer units where rent control does not apply. In order to make up for the lost passive income, right, from their lost passive income on these rent control standard buildings, they might take that out on their other tenants who are not in a rent control standard building and raise those rents exponentially. It's the rent gouging that we could see from the housing unit, or the rent gouging mechanisms on the non-rent controlled units, that puts those tenants in a potentially dangerous position where they could now experience exponential rises in their rents that could push them into rent burdened households, or they could now be considered a rent burdened household. And so that is something that could affect everyone, especially if right now you're comfortable. You might not be comfortable if your landlord is trying to find a way to maintain their own profit motives, and they are unable to meet those needs on their units that are now under rent control. You could be experiencing those high rises in price because a landlord's going to be making as much money and maintaining their existing profit motive as much as possible. And that's something that we have to address, and that affects everyone.
Back to that pesky profit motive, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
That pesky profit
and
motive.
I don't know if you've seen the story the story from, was it the New York Times? They wrote this article about this landlord, and it was kind of it's postured to be like a sad sob story for like small landlords who right now are experiencing incredibly difficult times because their tenants are unable to pay their mortgage, and some tenants are really bad and taking advantage of the moratorium on evictions. And it was so it was just so sympathetic to this landlord who turns out to be fucking awful. This landlord is awful. They have illegally occupied units that aren't even considered rental units, that don't even pass inspection code because of the flooding that occurs in the basement dwelling. And you start to realize that landlords are going to be crying no more. And a lot of them, they do not care what burden they are placing on their tenants. They are right now more upset with the fact that they are not making the same amount of money from rental income as they were pre-pandemic. And they will find any political agency necessary to make up for those lost wages. When I say lost wages, I mean the exploitation of their tenants, where they are extracting as much wealth from them as possible. And they will try to play the victim, as they have already, and as they will continue to do. So going up against pro-landlord sentiment in mainstream media and major news outlets is also is an incredible feat, especially because they have so much support. Far more support than the millions of people who are at risk for homelessness and eviction right now.
I'm one to agree with you, Amy, and say housing for all. And people will say, well, what are the poor landlords going to do? Where are the poor landlords going to live? It's like, no, I meant them too. They get housing too. Well, maybe not the landlords. We'll have to make a decision.
Give the fucking landlords public housing. Give them public housing.
A gulag is technically public housing.
I think that we have to try to really run with the message that everyone deserves a decent standard of living, and that includes public housing, food, and healthcare. We can talk about existing models in other places that have proven that these are incredibly successful.
Okay.
They help the economy. And destigmatizing homelessness is absolutely the first step. The second is destigmatizing public housing, because so many people either have no idea what public housing could mean based on how public housing is utilized in other countries. We have been conditioned into fearing a life of destitute in public housing in many respects, and that has absolutely been facilitated by the government and their failures to provide adequate and standard public housing stock that is livable. It is non-desirable for a specific reason. It is to force us to try as hard as possible to make sure that we are not reduced to a life of public housing living, and it's been quite effective in many respects. So that reprogramming of our minds to imagine what it could be like if we not only lived in public housing, but our neighbors were also recently homeless individuals who were coming off the street and living in a diversified mixed-income public housing apartment complex, rather than continue on with their current model or creation of our built environments that's drawn along socioeconomic lines, and often racial lines too, where we feel the most at home when we are in areas that we have surrounded ourselves with, that is a steady reminder of our own purchasing power and to satiate our own needs for consumption. We live in areas where we can afford to live, and we want to keep out individuals who can't afford to live there. And that's the reason why the suburbs and NIMBYism is so incredibly effective too. It's the reason why they are incredibly politically active. They want to keep people out of their gated communities because they paid to live there, and they want their surroundings to be a reminder of their own material wealth and socioeconomic status, their own class. And going up against the NIMBYs is also no easy feat, as we have learned in their push to keep a city council from diversifying the suburbs, to bring in a more fair, equitable use of space that would be granted to everyone, not just people living in the single-family dwellings in these R1 or R2 zoned areas.
For those like me who didn't know what a NIMBY was until you were listening to Hassan or something like that in the past year, that's when I learned NIMBY, NIMB, not in my backyard. And then you have what, you got YIMBYs? Yes, in my backyard? What are the different?
You got NIMBYs, you got YIMBYs, and you got FIMBYs. I'm a FIMBY.
FIMBY.
Public housing in my backyard.
Let's do it. I love that.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Okay. All right. I guess I'm that too. I like it. I just want to be like you, Amy. That's the main thing.
Oh,
I know.
Thank you.
You're cool. All right. So among the crises, we've touched on a lot of different things. And one thing like I mentioned earlier today, I was just like, oh shit, utilities. That's how utilities is housing. Because like you can have a house, but like if you don't have internet, well, we were just showing in the past year that, internet, very much like housing, is sort of a human right, especially when we live in the richest country in the history of the world. These things are human rights. And what's happened is they've commodified they've commodified them taking away our human rights. And that's a problem. I, for one, oppose that. Amy, what about you?
I do too.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I think
good show then. That's a good show.
The privatization too, where we're not only forced into the private sector for our utilities, we're also subjected to price gouging
Mm.
because the profit motive is 100% integral to the use of our utilities whenever it's distributed by the private market or the forces from within the private market that have competing interests over their own profits and maximizing their own profits. And whenever these services are only provided by a handful of competing corporations, then of course that burden is again placed back onto the consumer who have very little room to negotiate for the cost of their cell phone bill or the cost of their water bill or the cost of their internet. And that is absolutely an issue. 100%.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure we have enough time, just because we're coming up about 10 minutes on the hour here.
I can't believe it's already been an hour.
I know. I
That's
know. This has been really good. I almost want to say fun. I almost said fun. I just said it twice. Okay. So we've talked a little bit, we touched a little bit on potential solutions. If I remember, someone had a question earlier. Let me see if I can pull it up. If I can remember, this could fit into potential solutions, but it was Alan asking about how land trusts, asking about land trusts. Those are a way to protect against gentrification if they're used appropriately. The publicly owned land with particular lanes for use, etc. Do those fit into the solutions? Should we just give? Should we just? Why don't we just make permanent housing for homeless people? That seems where are our solutions? Where do we go from here?
Funny thing that a community land trust was mentioned because I am still working on the finishing touches of a written piece that I have been working on for way too long about community land trust and how they could be a viable solution to our current housing crises if the government, instead of giving money to Wall Street and the massive amount of bailouts they have given to Wall Street, instead were given to community land trusts, which are publicly owned parcels of land owned by a nonprofit acting in good faith as a steward of land that is protecting and preserving these areas, these neighborhoods from predatory investment because they're ostensibly taken off the market. They're put into this land trust that is built and meant to protect the land or the property from commodification. So it decommodifies the land and gives the residents an opportunity to still make equity on their homes because the special mortgage or the ground lease that would be offered in a CLT, it will be a 99-year termed lease. There is a formula that is applied where you make equity on your home, but you only own the house. The CLT owns the land, and either you can pass your home down to one of your children or somebody who you wish to inherit your home, or you sell it back to a CLT that has, they're the first lien holder. That is the way that we could offer community-owned land and protect and preserve our communities. That also is incredibly democratic. A lot of those decisions for public spaces that are within the CLT, those decisions are made by the members of the board who are democratically elected to oversee that land use decision-making process. So they were incredibly foundational during the civil rights movement whenever we also started to see the proliferation of real estate investment trusts from the Wall Street side, where big money interests were trying to take advantage of this new venture of commodifying land and property. This preserved incredibly vulnerable communities who had already experienced their fair share of displacement. And these could be emulated on a national scale. It would be an alternative to our current market-based housing. If we were not successful in increasing our public housing stock, and I think that a mixed model of public housing stocks and CLTs would be the most equitable solution possible, we would still need plenty of government intervention and government funding. But in many respects, there are self-sustainable mechanisms in place that would allow a community to make investments into their own land, their own space, without heavy government intervention. But if there was a fraction of government funding through federally backed mortgages, through government assurances that now exclusively only go to Wall Street entities, then that would absolutely be one of the best ways to ensure that communities not only have affordable housing, but then also have ownership or a stake in their own lands that will be protected literally in perpetuity without having to fear that, a Blackstone Wall Street company is going to come and do a land grab, purchase an entire neighborhood, which is what they've done. They did that after 2008, whenever the subprime mortgage market collapsed. They've been doing it ever since. So yes, going back to what I had mentioned in the beginning, Wall Street entities right now are doing everything in their power to try to accumulate as much land and as many houses as possible. If there's an opportunity to make these huge investments in entire neighborhoods that could likely start the process of gentrification in these areas that are a little dispossessed, a little dilapidated, but is in a metropolitan area that has a promise of economic sustainability, then gentrification will occur. And that is likely to happen. And one of the best solutions that we could do is lobby and organize and campaign for a wide-scaled CLT movement where individuals are standing up and saying, no, I'm not only going to lose a stake in my own community, I refuse to remain a renter until we can get to a point and the conversation shifts to, all right, actually, we're going to abolish private property, but we needed to kind of get to a place where people had control over their own land and there was no more housing market the way that we have now, and people have a stake in their communities and it's democratized. But now let's kind of shift away from the idea of making any money off of the ownership of land. I think that's a really good transition to once you give the power back to the people to have a stake in their own communities, and some of that power is distributed back to actual communities, then you can start to work on the greater issue here, which is the fact that land has become is a scarcity, and it's become one of the biggest money-making schemes, not only in the United States, but on a global scale. We have to stop making money off of land. It is a natural resource. It is not a commodity. You can consider it a utility insofar as it's used for agricultural purposes, but that is 100%, I think, the end goal here. But you have some steps you got to hit before you get there.
Couple of steps. Sounds good.
Few steps.
We're coming up. I say maybe we got 5 more minutes. I don't want to take too much of your time, so I would love to maybe put a pin in this after a couple minutes, and maybe even have you back after some time again. But before we go, I wanted to sort of shoehorn this in there. Something that struck me this week, some data facts that struck me this week. Again, I'll return to that 567,000 homeless on a given night in 2019, sort of giving us an idea of the problem and the breadth, the scale of the problem here in the United States. Whereas a place like Cuba literally has 0. Mm-hmm. Like, I want what they're having. Why can't we have it?
That's a great question. What is so scary about a centralized government offering the bare necessities to every single person as a guarantee, not something that you have to pay for, that you have to struggle and potentially die for? Why are we so focused on maintaining our a robust stock market and high GDP at the expense of our most vulnerable people? Why is everyone so afraid of communism?
It's the tankies.
Yeah.
No, I'm totally joking.
So Tariq Kwame, amazing speaker. We watched might have butchered the name, but
yeah,
sorry about that. Stokely Carmichael.
Okay.
We recently watched a little snippet from one of his speeches, and he was talking about how Cuba's a poor country. Cuba's one of the poorest countries, in fact, in terms of global economic output and in terms of GDP or gross domestic product. But every single one of every single citizen has a roof over their head, and every single child knows how to read. And the investment of the government was made back into the communities, and they invested in their people, and they offered long-term sustainability for their citizens, and not on their spreadsheets, or not on their corporations, or not on their their potential growth or maximum growth that they were hoping to achieve in these corporate boardrooms. And so it has so much to do with our corporatocracy kind of running the show, and that being the major reason why so much of government spending goes into the elevation of these corporations that are driving global economic output that help so few people, while so many other people, the vast majority in fact, are struggling to even keep a roof over our heads. Many of them are right now on the cusp of eviction. Right now, we are seeing higher numbers in our homeless population. So the number that you're referencing, that's a little over 500,000 as of 2019, that number has risen. It's closer to, some estimates have this number closer to 700,000.
Oh, God.
So if we're talking about the number of people who are experiencing homelessness right now that might not be living on the street, but couch surfing or are still incredibly housing insecure, then this number is only rising, and it's only going to get worse. So unless we have a major government intervention where more funds are put into the security and the stable housing and living opportunities alongside equitable outcomes like Medicare for all and free education, so many people are going to be experiencing destitution. And that is going to stay so long as we, as members of communities who are absolutely in a position where we can't go head to head with our corporatocracy. That is our fate unless we organize.
Yeah, it's like as a society, we chose to instead of getting rid of child homelessness, where there's apparently 2.4 million homeless kids. Wait, did I just put? Hold on. What did two? That number doesn't fit in there. I'm sorry. Hold on. Where did I get that number from? Either way,
is that like on a global scale?
I don't. Maybe it's a global.
global?
I'm trying to remember where I got that from, and I just pulled that out, and it doesn't make any sense once I said it out loud. The point is, we chose between getting rid of child homelessness and, bailing out banks, giving Amazon a tax break. Like, this is our society. This is who we are. And Cuba didn't bail out the banks. Cuba didn't give Amazon a tax break. So maybe that's the issue.
Cuba has anything that's remotely resembling Amazon. Probably not. No, I'd say no. Don't they have the most doctors per capita?
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
They have an abundance of doctors. They're working on vaccines for cancer treatment. They're offering cancer treatments and vaccines.
Sorry.
Kind of spearheading a lot of this technological achievement in our healthcare sector. Meanwhile, yeah, the most common type of bankruptcy here in the United States is medical bankruptcy.
Mm. Yep.
Just putting that out there.
Pretty bad.
So we're getting back into highs and lows. We're just ebbing and flowing here. And now we're look, slumps down. It's like the defeatist position.
Well, Amy, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Why don't we go ahead and let you give yourself the big shout out again, as people may have joined us throughout the chat. Let us know who you are and where we could find you and what you do.
All right, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is AmyeC3. I talk about housing here and it usually is a little bit more doom and gloom. We try to make it fun by playing Mario Kart. So you can check me out on AmyeC3. We do data-driven analyses. We play video games. And we try to keep it interesting with political commentary as well. So, yeah, check me out sometime if you want.
Awesome. Amy, thank you again for dropping by and holding my hand through a lot of different things. I literally think that this is going to be really good for me to just, in the next week, I'm probably just going to watch this again and just take more notes, as I found that it was too hard to do that while chatting at the same time. But I learned a lot. And this was especially illuminating. And I know we were talking about facts that were not especially fun, but I think you did a good job of making it as fun as possible. And this was very enjoyable. So thank you again for dropping by, comrade.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll let you go, Amy. We'll see you next time.
Right.
Peace, solidarity. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. All right. Yeah. That was Amy. Hey, YouTube. You're watching a clip from my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/iDanSimpson, where you can follow for free and subscribe for only $5 a month. Thanks for watching.